Man, that's unreal. I know you're really short pressed for time. I just want to ask you two more questions, and I really wanted to get your insight. If it's okay with you, if we could talk about Tunch Ilkin for a moment. Is that okay if we bring up the legend Tunch? For me, with my, I'd never watched you guys playing. I was born in 1989, so when I became a fan, Steelers fan in 2004, was the Maddox era. 2002 was I played on the Madden games, all that kind of stuff. That's why I became a fan of the Steelers because of the colors. I've only really, the last from 2008, I learned all the history, and now I'm a super crazy fan. But one of the first blokes and one of the first guys I ever heard on the Steelers Nation radio was Tunch Ilkin. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the legend that is Tunch Ilkin because he was a real big part of my life when I pressed the Steelers radio app button and I heard the breakdowns and I heard the calls and him and Wolf. I think him and Wolf was one of the most like excellent radio duos. I know he's a good player as well, but I'm just like strictly talking radio. Those two together were fantastic, like absolutely fantastic on the radio waves, and it made me feel that old school Steelers, approach to the game and stuff like that. Can you expand any thoughts or any cool stories on Tunch Ilkin?
Well, first of all, Tunch was a dear friend, one of the greatest teammates you could have, and his tragic death was, and still is, like it's hard to still put into words. Now, I'm gonna back up a little bit. We played together. Most people won't know this. I know you won't know this. Tunch replaced me in the radio booth with Bill Hillgrove and Myron Cope. I was the first player in Steeler history to do that. Mr. Rooney asked me to come do it. I only share it because like everybody thinks Tunch Ilkin was the first player in the booth. Tunch and I always laugh about it. Because ESPN there was a shift about week 5. I'd been in the booth about a year and a half, and I was working at ESPN too. I was doing both. And they had a shift and they needed somebody to go full-time in the NFL about week 5. So I opted to do that and I left the broadcast booth. Now, prior to that, the reason nobody really remembers me being there because we had our roles defined. Bill Hillgrove was going to be the play-by-play guy who set up the play. Myron Cope was going to add color like he's always done. And here's what my role was. Merril will speak when spoken to. What? They never spoke to me. I mean, they'd ask me questions. So anyway, I say it as a joke, but it's the truth. It's exactly the role that I had there. I learned a lot from there. But my point is most people don't even know that I was ever in the broadcast booth. And the only evidence that I have is A, that I did it. And then B, when you look at the history of broadcast that's at Heinz Field or Acrisure Stadium now, the broadcast history, there's a picture of me and Bill Hillgrove and Myron Cope. So that being said, when Tunch takes over, the first thing I told him to do was try to befriend Myron Cope. The way it was set up, Myron Cope felt that I was a threat to Myron Cope, when in reality he created the threat. I was no threat to Myron Cope. I haven't told him I was no threat. I knew I was no threat. I was just there to learn. I had great respect for him, and he'd been doing it for several decades. So I get how hard the transition would be to invite somebody into a booth that you have never had and add that to there. And they didn't do the best job of making the transition a part of it. But if there was one guy, and as much as I tried to do it with Myron, he just was not receptive to it. And Tunch broke that barrier down with him. And that kind of speaks to what Tunch was. I mean, Tunch was he was a dear, dear friend. I mean, when I say a dear friend, when he left, I think he went to the Packers, if I remember. I took him and his wife out to dinner, and I spent with the video crew, about a month putting together a highlight reel of him. And all the time he used to say it was one of the best gifts he ever got, the highlight reel that we put together for him. But it was one of the first times where I really had a close friend. People get cut all the time. And, but most of the time you don't know the people very long before they get cut, and it's a kind of a brutal business from that perspective because people are constantly coming and going. But to have played with a guy for a few years like that and had as much respect as I had for him, it was hard to see him go. And he was a great student of the game. He was reverent, funny, insightful, and just a genuinely good human being, and an awesome football player. He's the only guy I've ever seen stagger Reggie White. They just call him Tunch. I'm sure that you probably heard a little bit about, he would talk about his, Punch Tunch was his nickname, because he had such a punch that, look, when you can take Reggie White and stagger him, give him a standing 8.
Is that when you're getting off the line? You like when you're offensive line form like this?
And punch, and his hands would strike so quick, and he was so inside, and he was so precise. Man, Reggie White come up. I'm like telling you, if Reggie White was alive today, he'd be able to tell you about it. Tunch was a technician.
Yeah.
A technician, man. Undersized, but man, he didn't give up sacks, man. And that's all that matters. He was a football playing Jesse.
I tell you what, because even for me, like, I'm a massive, huge fan of the Steelers. I'm massive, right? But I think he was one of the first people I think I've heard, like, on the Steelers radio airwaves. And then you go back as you learn more and more about the history and the fandom and stuff like that. You go back to that stuff, right? Him back in the old days. But to me, what I got the sense of, and it really hit me hard, I think a lot of Steeler Nation hard all over the shop. What the best thing I think about Tunch for me on the radio airwaves, it felt like he was a mate. It felt like when you was talking to Wolfley back and forth about football, you felt like you were sitting in the same room with them. It felt like, for me, being all the way in Australia, I was like, holy dooly, man. I feel like he's a mate. Do you know what I mean? Was that the sense that you guys had your relationship too, that you were just good mates? And
I think that's a combination of how him and Wolf are. They're really good friends. They're dear friends. They played against next to each other. Wolf was a teammate of mine too, for a year, and then Tunch I played with Tunch a little longer, but those two played together in the trenches. So they've been working together for a long time. So that's not surprising that didn't translate and come out. That they're just talking and you're part of the conversation. And that's how they are too. Both of them are just good human beings, and they're not better than you because of what they do. They make you a part of everything they're a part of, and that's what makes them truly great people.